back to another episode of the NeoMasculinity Solutions team interview series. We have a very special guest for this episode of this short podcast, if it is a podcast. But I want people to know that NeoMasculinity Solutions is more than just a guy with a good idea. It's more than me. It's not really about me. We are supported by a team of professionals, human beings with great spirit, authentic souls that want to share their stories. But even more importantly, they want to help the families and the loved ones out there who are being hurt by unreliable information. Now, our guest today, Jill Stephenson, is a mother of a warrior. She raised a warrior single-handedly. Ben Kopp, she'll talk a little bit about Ben today. We'll share that story. But Ben was a United States Army Ranger. He wasn't just a Ranger on paper. He lived and he breathed the Ranger creed. And we'll get into his story in a little while. But when you hear the story, you're going to think to yourself, how does a person against all odds, a single mother, raise a warrior like Ben was? I met Jill Stephenson, I don't know, a decade ago now. We were at some Navy SEAL, I think it was Brian Bill Foundation down in Florida. Jill's in Oklahoma now, I'm in Virginia, but we struck up a conversation and we immediately appreciated each other and what we stood for and what our value sets were. And Jill and I have been friends for, I'd say it's almost a decade. For that long, we've stayed in touch, even though we've traveled and moved all over the place. And I approached Jill maybe a year ago with the concept of NeoMasculinity Solutions, and she didn't even hesitate. She said, I want to be part of it. So she's a part of it in spirit, but she's also working on presentations so she can let the world know how she raised a man, and not only just a man, but a warrior. It's not easy to get that Ranger tab. So without any further ado, welcome, Jill. Thank you for giving us your time. I guess let's start with talking a little bit about you. How did you get to that seat where you're at right now?
Gosh, well, hi John.
Hey,
Thanks
good
for
seeing
having
you.
me on. Yeah, good to see
Absolutely.
you. How did I get to this seat? Man, I don't know how far back do you want me to go? I think I could take it back a couple generations, to be honest, with the influences that I've had in my life. I ended up in this seat where I am right now just by the will and the grace of God. The experiences that I've had in the places that He's moved me and bounced me around and me just following where I believed He wanted me to go. That's what I've done. Born and raised in Minnesota, and I got bounced out just before you and I met because of a house fire. And I lived there my whole life, with the exception of a little time period during my pregnancy with Ben. But I spent time in Florida, Indiana, Arkansas, back to Minnesota, and now I'm here in the greater Tulsa area in Oklahoma. And I love it. And I love it. And people ask me, when I landed in each of those states, is this where you're going to stay now? And I always say, only God knows where I'm going to stay. Because of my life experience, I've learned that nothing is permanent. Life is impermanent. Life itself is, and every event in our lives is impermanent. And so I don't feel like, oh, this is where I'm going to be forever. No, I'm here until God tells me to move again. And I will get comfortable here and enjoy it. And I absolutely love being here. But I don't know if this is where I'm going to be forever. I have no idea. But I love where I am. I love where I am, where I live, and life just brought me here, John. I was born and raised, as I said, in Minnesota, and didn't imagine myself leaving there until one day something switched in me or flipped in me, where I felt driven to get out of there. I had a nomadic spirit in me that hadn't been tapped until after Ben died, and then after my house fire. Then I was like, yeah, I'm out. I've got to answer this call to be the nomadic one, and that's what I've been doing. My fire was 10 years ago, and I have not owned a house since. Since that time, I've been able to float my boat and make things work without owning a home over the last 10 years. And that's taken me to several different states and getting to experience life and people in different areas. And all that's done for me is very good things. It's just colored my experience about life, got me in front of different cultures, different people, different parts of the country. You know, what a beautiful country we have. What a beautiful country we have. Now, I'm very fortunate to have touched my feet in all 50 states. I don't have a favorite state. I say there's something beautiful about each one of them. Each state has something that I love. You know, I have some favorites, but I'm really grateful for that I've got to meet people all over the place. And you're part of that list of people, John, because had I not been in Florida, we wouldn't have met. And now here we are, now 10 years later, and we're both in different places and have journeyed a little bit around. So that's just a little bit about physically, you know, how I got where I am, you know, mentally. Then that's the story that we're gonna unpack here,
That's what
right?
we're going to unpack. We are, thank you for sharing that. And you're so right. Immediately when I met you, one thing that struck me right off the bat was your authenticity.
Mhm.
And, we go through our lives and do the things we do. And it's very rare to come across a person that's totally like you, Jill. And that humbled and honored me because I think we went to a couple other events and things and
Yeah,
we got to
yeah.
know each other. And when you shared more and more about your son, Ben, I was just even awestruck at that story, which we'll share here in a minute. But those things, you and I have talked about over the years about the blessings. And you're right. We have bounced around a little bit and here we are in different states.
Mhm.
But at the same time, we've had some incredible experiences and we have been able to touch people in a positive way. Your story alone, I don't think a day goes by or a week or a month goes by that I don't think, at least in part, about your son. And I'm always wondering, and that's why we always come back around every 90 days or every
Yeah.
120 days and to
Yeah.
see, making sure we're okay. But because your story and you yourself as a person are the kind of people, it's the kind of story that means a lot to me when you talk about all 50 states and how great this country is. But people like you are the people I want to associate with. And it seems like the older I get, the more I finally start to meet some,
Yeah.
although rare. So you're very rare indeed. Um, and just thank you for being you. We're not into this yet, but so tell us. I mentioned earlier that you were a single mom,
Mhm.
right? And you talked about some influence we can that you've had growing up and from your ancestry. Talk to us about being a mother for Ben and the things that you did with him and for him that he was able to absorb that made him become a U.S. Army Ranger. Tell us about your motherhood.
Well, my journey as a mother began when I was a very wise 20 years old. I became a mother at a very, very young age, at a very young age. Prior to that, the greatest influence on me becoming a mother was my own mother. And I had lost my 11-year-old brother just 4.5 years before that. At 15, my 11-year-old brother was struck and killed by a car. So becoming a mother just a short time after that, 5 minutes. I mean, 5 years can feel like 5 minutes in a grief journey. But I knew that tomorrow wasn't promised. And so it made me love on my baby even more. I wanted to hold tight to every single minute that I had. So from the moment that I looked into Ben's eyes, that I held him for the first time, I promised him that I would protect him for the rest of our lives, for as long as I was given to protect him from that. His father was not around in not really ever in his life. He was sporadically involved in his life, but not consistently involved. And I just readily and willingly took on that role. I didn't become a mother because I was counting on someone helping me raise my child. I became a mother because I wanted to give my baby life and I wanted to give him as much love as I possibly could and to have a good influence on him and who he would become as a man, truly, from the time he was a baby. One of the greatest influences on my life, who would in turn become that influence on Ben, was my grandfather. My grandfather was a man who had retired from working for the Postal Service for 20 years. And prior to that, he had served in the military. He was a World War II veteran. He served from 1939 to 1945. And he just so happened to serve in the same theater in the same locations as the early Rangers, the Darby's Rangers. I didn't discover that until much later, but that's a cool fact I like to share. I kind of feel like that maybe had an influence on Ben too, just knowing that my grandfather brushed elbows. He literally was in the same place as the early Rangers. But my grandfather, proudly served his country. He didn't come from a military family. It wasn't like a hoorah, we're all going to be infantry, go infantry.
I know some
That's
of
what,
those guys. Yeah.
right? Yeah. I mean, there were guys like that, but he served out of duty to country. That's what a lot of the World War II veterans did. He served his time honorably. He earned a Purple Heart and a Bronze Star and had some battle scars and battle wounds and didn't talk about it much like a lot of those guys. But he raised a family of 6 kids and that brood grew over time, with grandchildren and great grandchildren. And some years shortly after his retirement, he and my grandmother bought a cabin in northern Minnesota. And that happened when I was 8 years old. And I spent all my summers going up there. We spent as much time as we possibly could at the cabin. And that's where my grandfather's influence really touched me. I saw how he was with all of me and my cousins as grandchildren. And then as the greats came along, everybody wanted to go up there and spend time with him. And my grandmother as well, but just at the cabin with them. He was very gentle. He was very wise. He taught us so many things about life, just in general conversation. He taught us to stand our ground, to not make statements about things unless you know for sure you're speaking a fact. If you're going to say that Chevys are better than Fords, you better be able to tell them why. You don't just make ambiguous statements and not have anything to back it up. That was one of the great things he taught us. If you were able to listen in on his wisdom and let him teach you things, then he was the best teacher ever. If he recognized that you weren't listening to what he was trying to teach you, he would call you out on it. You're not listening to me. No, you need to listen to this. If you were having a fit about something you probably shouldn't be having a fit about, he would ask you to explain why you're having a fit about it. Again,
Yeah.
back up what you're talking about, what you're feeling. That's what I was raised in. And when I had Ben, I wanted Ben to experience that as well.
Yeah,
And so I,
it's amazing. There's World War II that they called those guys the greatest generation.
yeah,
And it's
yes,
amazing how they came back from their
mhm,
horrible experiences of combat
yeah,
and went about their business and probably knew more than most people how important it was to have that love of country and what
yeah,
family meant because he did have a Purple Heart and being wounded and making it back alive,
hmm
you know, did some things to him that he was going to come back and he took that horror and he was able to turn around and help you. So I didn't
yeah,
mean to cut you off, but that was a thought that you gave me.
no, that's okay. No, absolutely. And then in turn, that helped Ben and influenced Ben as well. Spending time at the cabin with my grandfather for myself and Ben was that he became that male role model that was missing in Ben's life, and therefore the strongest male role model that Ben had. I stepped in and did all I could when we were away from him, because I grew up at the cabin and we were never afraid to go fishing and dig worms, and we were taught to take the fish off the hook and do things like that. It wasn't, this is only the boys go out and fish and do that. Oh no, we were all down there doing that and participating and being involved in the daily happenings of what goes on in the outdoors and taught not to be afraid of that. And so I in turn taught Ben those things, from a very young age. We were always outside. And this was, Ben was raised in the early 90s. This was before technology took over, you know. And it was important to me to have him spend that time outside and get to know the great outdoors. So we went fishing, we caught frogs, we flew kites. I taught him how to hit a baseball and throw a football and all those things that are the boy sports and what boys want to do and be outside. And Ben was that boy's boy from a very young age. And a lot of that, I believe, is because I allowed him to have those experiences. I was never a helicopter mom. I was okay with him getting dirty. I was totally okay with him getting dirty. And in his first 6 years, I lived in a large apartment complex, and there was some other single moms there too. And there was one gal I remember whose son could never get dirty. She didn't want him to get dirty because how he looked was important to him. Like he had nice clothes on, and I'm like, why would you put a 3-year-old boy outside in white pants? Are you dumb? Like
You gotta wonder, but
you
yeah,
got, you got to wonder, but that was, it was more important to her that her kid looked good than it was for him to experience what it meant to have fun and be outside and be a boy. And I was never that way. Like, no, boys are supposed to get dirty, and if they rip the knees in their jeans, then good, because it shows they're having fun and they're putting those jeans to a test. So, so I stepped in and did those things with Ben and some of the neighbor kids as well, whose parents weren't doing what I was doing. But the majority of, that male influence, like I said, for me and Ben came from my grandfather. And Ben started talking to him about those things when he was about 7. And that's when he noticed my grandfather's medals in a small curio cabinet that he had at the cabin on the wall. And he wanted to know what those things were and where they came from. And my grandfather obliged his questions and told him what they were. And that's really what started Ben's interest in the military, is hearing my grandfather tell his stories. And they were few, he didn't like to talk about it a lot. And for a young boy, his questions weren't necessarily um, well thought out. They were sporadic, like, how did you get that Purple Heart? What do you do to get that? Well, well, I got shot. I
yeah.
got injured. I was wounded. And, he didn't have an understanding of that until he was a little bit older. But like I said, my grandfather always obliged his questions and answered them. And, it didn't take long for Ben to have this deep admiration for him, not just because he served in the military and he served in World War II, because being so young, Ben didn't understand the depth and the magnitude of what that meant. But he was the whole picture to Ben. He was his great grandfather. He was my grandfather. He was the patriarch of the cabin. Of every person that came to the cabin, all of my aunts and uncles and cousins and his cousins, my grandfather was the leader of that clan. And he saw him as that, that he served his country. Then he came back. He honorably worked for 20 years as a postal worker on foot, and
Hmm.
then bought this cabin on a lake that we all got to have benefits of. And so he was like, Moses himself to Ben. Like he looked up to him so much. And just like I said, he admired everything about him as a man and wanted to grow up and be just like him.
So I'm thinking about that environment for Ben as a young boy, and the things that he benefited from that, which he took into Ranger training. A
Yes.
sense of family, um, teamwork, doing things together, um, self-responsibility and self-agency,
Hmm.
a love of country. Those things that they get embedded in your heart and they stay there.
Yeah.
And I think that, we mentioned um, the Ranger Creed, and I'm sure that those things that were instilled in him by you and your grandfather is what carried him through his toughest moments. Uh, Ben doesn't seem to me, and I didn't know him personally, but he doesn't seem to me like a guy that made up excuses. And in
Never.
fact, he was wounded in combat, saving his buddies from a sniper, from what I understand.
Yes.
And he did not pass immediately. It happened when he got back to the States.
Hmm.
but shortly thereafter. Tell us a little bit about that and why. I know that you wrote a book, The Heart of a Ranger, or somebody wrote a book about you.
Yes.
And tell us a little bit about that when he came back injured and wounded, actually more than injured, but and what that was like.
Well, he was on his third deployment when that happened. He had been to Iraq twice. He was in his third year as an Army Ranger. He joined the military straight out of high school. He signed up on the delayed entry program. So in the fall of his senior year, he was property of the U.S. military as soon as he got that diploma in hand. Exactly 1 month from the day he graduated, he was at MEPS waiting for the bus to take him to the airport to go to Fort Benning and train with the infantry just like his great grandfather. So he was following in his footsteps. He went through all the training necessary to become a ranger, and he completed that only 7 months after he left Minnesota to join the army. So he fast-tracked his way in and completed everything rather quickly. So it's February of 2007 when he landed at the 3rd Ranger Battalion and was assigned to Charlie Company. So in the spring of 2009, so literally only just a little over 2 years later, he was walking into his third deployment. That's a lot, 3 deployments in 2 years. It's typical of Army Rangers, as you know. They're not like, I'll say, big Army or big military, where they're going on, year-long or 9-month or 18-month deployments every other year. Rangers go in active wartime. Of course, we're not in active wartime now, but they go once a year, maybe every 8 to 9 months. So it wasn't uncommon for Ben to be facing his third deployment in only 2 calendar years. But still, that's a lot, As he walked into that deployment, he was 21 and a half,
Hmm.
21 and a half, so still pretty young. And they were in Afghanistan. The other 2 deployments had been to Iraq. They knew that they were going to see combat in a way that Ben had not seen it before. They were going into what they called a hot zone, a place that hadn't seen combat for a long time. They had their eye on a high value target, and they just knew it was going to be ugly. Ben had I say he had trepidations about going. He just, something in his gut just didn't feel right to him. He shared that with my mom and I and 2 of his really close girlfriends, and that's it. He never said the words that he was afraid he was going to die or that something bad was going to happen. He just, something in his gut just didn't feel right, and he couldn't identify it. And we thought it was just because they were foretold that it was going to be pretty nasty where they were going and to expect that. So he went on his way. He came home on a block leave before that, and he was home for about 17 days. That's when he shared those feelings. And then he got back to Fort Benning, and they still had maybe 10 days or so, 2 weeks before they were leaving. And the weekend before they were leaving was Mother's Day. And Ben literally went AWOL and came home one last time for the weekend. He never got busted. His buddies covered for him, and the chain of command, didn't know he was gone, but he literally left without permission and just felt called to come home one last time. So the last weekend that I spent with him, alive and well, was Mother's Day, which was a
That's
blessing.
real
And
special. Yeah.
yeah, very special. So the day that he got back to Fort Benning, that night he called me, or was the next night, and he told me that his buddy McGee had been killed in Iraq the night before, and he was upset about it. It was the first buddy that he had lost in his years of service, and he said, "Now it's game on. Now it's game on, MFers," is what he said. Where he was not feeling the call to go put on his game face and be an Army Ranger. Now he was ready. McGee's death stirred the embers in his belly and churned him into a blazing fire. And now he was like, It's game on. We're going. So they headed over to Afghanistan. And in 2009, well, I don't know what it's like today, but I know as years went on, even Rangers were able to have, calls with their families. They could have phone calls, they could do video chats. We didn't get that in 2009. I got an occasional email requesting items to be sent in a care package, a phone call occasionally. And when the calls came, it wasn't like our phones are even now, all these years later. The call either said unknown number or it was all zeros. And that was how I knew it was Ben calling from overseas. I got a call from him on July 1st, 2009, and he was over there, and it was the first time I had spoke to him since he left. So it was the first time I'd heard from him in about 7 weeks, 6 weeks, on the phone. We had a couple email exchanges, but he just said that things were as bad and nasty and ugly as they had predicted and as they thought they were going to be. And of course, he couldn't give me any of those details, or the details of why. They didn't have any running water. They lived on, pallets of bottled water. That's how they showered. That's how they brushed their teeth. That's what they drank. There wasn't refrigeration. It was just water sitting outside. It was pretty nasty. I could hear how far away he was in his voice, and I don't mean by distance. Emotionally, it was very challenging to him, and I could hear that. I got to speak to him for, we probably talked about 15 minutes, 15, maybe 10, 15 minutes. And we ended our conversation. We talked about things he wanted to do when he got back. He talked about, getting out of the military. He had a 4-year contract. He had a list of, he said 597 reasons why he wasn't going to reenlist.
I hear it. Yeah.
Yeah, who knows what would have happened, but things that he wanted to do when he got out, things that he wished he could do, but his back was, already messed up from being a ranger for 3 years. And we ended our conversations like we did every other call that we had, John, by saying, I love you. So 9 days later, I got a call from his company commander letting me know that Ben had been shot. I was at work. It was a Friday afternoon, late in the day. I was getting ready to leave. And they told me that he had been shot by a sniper, that he had undergone surgery, and he was lying in recovery. They were waiting for him to wake up in Afghanistan. And then I was told to just stand by for more information. His commander told me that he'd been shot in the leg, and then gave me some other details. And then he asked if I had any questions, and my only question was, is he going to lose his leg? That's what I wanted to know. The vision back then in those days when men came back from being in combat, being seriously wounded, was that they would lose a limb, right? They come back on crutches with half a leg, or now they have a prosthetic arm.
So many of them too.
So
Yeah.
many of them did back then, and in Iraq, and stepping on IEDs is what that was. Although Ben didn't step on an IED, but that was my only question: is he going to lose his leg? And he said, as far as they knew, his leg would be fine. He wasn't going to lose his leg. So then they just said to stand by for the next update. So I did. I stood by. Then they let me know that they may transport him to Germany. And did I have a passport ready to go? And yeah, I did. It ended up that he was able to get to Germany and stabilized enough to land at Walter Reed 4 days after he had been shot. I should go backwards a little bit, as you mentioned it earlier, that in that firefight, he saved 6 of his fellow Rangers. Ben did. They had been pinned down by a Taliban sniper, and they called for backup, and for some reason the chain of command wouldn't send backup. And so it was up to Ben as the gun team leader and as his team leader to come forward and save his brothers. One of those snipers was felt so close to death because of how near the bullets were coming to him that he was ready to pull the pin on a grenade and die at his own hand than rather at the hand of the enemy until Ben came forward. So Ben saved six of his fellow Rangers in that firefight that cost him his life. And when he landed at Walter Reed 4 days later, he had undergone surgery and subsequently had not woken up from that surgery. When they turned down the anesthesia to wake him up, he didn't respond. And it was from that time forward that they knew something was wrong. In the midst of his recovery, still in Afghanistan, he had a cardiac arrest, and they were able to revive him and get him stable again after a few minutes. In the midst of that, they discovered that the oxygen tank that he was breathing from was in need of service, and so he was breathing the equivalent of room air, which is what you and I are breathing right now. And the defibrillators, when they went to grab them, they were without batteries. So he was, CPR was performed manually. That lack of oxygen for that period of time caused his brain to swell. And that is why he didn't wake up when they attempted to turn down the anesthesia and wake him up. So his brain began to swell. It basically, like, if your brain doesn't have oxygen, it's going to die.
Right.
And when he landed at Walter Reed 4 days later, the next day, the doctors had reassessed him there and told my mother and I, who we had arrived at Walter Reed by that point, that they believed Ben was brain dead. And that was the outlook. And up until that moment, and even beyond that, a few days, I never believed for 1 minute, the thought never crossed my mind. And I mean, never crossed my mind that Ben would not survive his injuries. I never thought for a moment that Ben would not survive his service. I never even entertained the thought in my head that something bad would happen to him because he was so strong. Because he was so strong, he was so determined, he was so convicted, he was so proud. I just didn't entertain that thought. Like that's nothing's going to happen to him. He'll be fine. And that's not the way things turned out.
No, it's not enough. First of all, thank you for sharing that. It's a tragic story on the hand of losing Ben, but on the other hand, it's a remarkable story of strength and commitment and duty and honor and
Mhm.
bravery, not only from Ben, but from you. And those are the qualities, you know me, but those are the
Yeah.
qualities that we live by.
Hmm.
People with great heart and people who are authentic and believe in something outside of ourselves. And
Yeah.
Ben exemplified all of those. And I know that, we talked about the heart of a ranger. And then you and I think did an interview once, the heart of the ranger's mother, which,
Yeah.
which was like the same thing, just your story. And then, I know that Ben's heart ended up going to a recipient as well as a lot of other of his pieces of his body, which
Hmm.
must have been a tough decision. But the amazing thing about that, Jill, is that, and you already know this, that so many people, I don't know the exact number, but you said it was over 50,
Hmm.
uh, were able to live a better life because of that one United States Army Ranger that not only sacrificed his life, but sacrificed pieces of his body so that others may live. That
Yeah.
incredible.
He directly saved the lives of four people with the donation of his heart, kidneys, and liver, and then enhanced 55 more with the donation of his bones, skin, and tissue. So,
Phenomenal. And so
yeah, in addition to the six Rangers, his brothers that he saved on the battlefield, he saved four more lives with those donations. So he saved 10 lives directly.
that's a real man. That's a
Hmm.
warrior amongst people who aren't warriors.
Yeah.
And he lived it and he breathed it. And it's guys like him that allow guys like me to sit at microphones like this and talk to people.
Yeah.
And my hope and I know it is yours too, but my hope in having this platform to share that story once again, who I know we've shared it hundreds and thousands of times, but my hope is that people who are listening, and thank you for listening, will take Ben's example and try to make their lives better, but the lives for the people around them better ones too.
Yeah.
And so thank you for raising Ben.
Mm.
It sounds trite at this point, but the reality is that I mean those things. And we need more people to express those feelings to each other because authenticity and approval and acceptance and all of those things that we talk about in life mean something. And Ben meant a lot to a lot of people. God bless
Yeah.
him.
Thank you. Yeah, and he still does. It's been 16 years and a couple months since he passed, and he's still having a positive influence on people. The Still, because of the kind of friend he was before he went in the military, in his school years, especially in his high school years, and then the kind of man that he grew to become was so greatly influenced by my grandfather. And as you said, those things he learned in his growing up years from me and from him, of course, influence who he became as a ranger and how he came to be that kind of a person. But who he was as a ranger and a friend to those brothers as well still has an influence. I still have connection to a lot of the guys that he served with. And the organ donation part of it is just one part of it. That's who Ben became after his death. So there's the Ben is almost like the before death and after death, who Ben was. And in fact, the woman who received Ben's heart, she received Ben's heart at the age of 57 and just died earlier this year in March at the age of 72, and she was just short of her 73rd birthday. But she got 15 years and 7 months with Army Ranger heart. And she died of a health issue. She died from cancer, completely unrelated to her heart.
Outstanding. I mean, not
And
outstanding. I mean, outstanding that,
well, right,
yeah,
right.
that
And one of her friends that let me know that Judy had died said that Ben's heart did just fine. He stayed with her until the end. And so I think of it, in military terms, that Ben stayed on to complete the objective, and that's part of the Ranger Creed. He stayed with Judy in her chest till the objective was complete, and that was when she died. He never left her in that aspect, and that to me is also a testament to Ben's character. Even though it wasn't his full body, it was his spirit and it was his heart that made her life possible for almost 16 more years.
well, I got to tell you, Jill, that story that gives real meaning to heartfelt,
Yeah, yeah.
because that's what that's all about. And it was that story that you shared with me 10 years ago, and just
Hmm.
you yourself as a person, that authenticity that we talked about, that switched in my mind that I sooner or later I'm going to work with Jill on some project. And that's what we're doing now with NeoMasculinity Solutions is we're giving tools for men to embrace their masculinity, which obviously your son did.
Hmm.
And I know that you've got that presentation, how single mom raised a masculine man. And
Hmm.
masculinity, they want us to believe that it's toxic, but it's not. It's such a narrative that just it takes men off of their game, off of what their God-given responsibility is, which is to protect their families and loved ones. Let's shift gears a little bit. Why when I shared with you the Neo-Masculinity Solutions mission, what was it about it that you felt like you wanted to help out with the mission? And then I'm going to ask you some personal questions because this interview is about you, and I want people out there to see and hear you. And again, like we said at the beginning, let them know that the mission that we're on now has some of the most awesome people on the face of the planet behind it. What was it about Neomasculinity Solutions that intrigued you?
Well, first of all, John, it was coming to me through you. And I already had a great respect and admiration for you as not just a person, but as a friend, somebody that I has been a friend for a number of years. So I believe in anything that you believe in. For that reason, I trust
Thank you.
what
You're
you
gonna make me
believe in.
cry
And
now, Jill. Don't,
yeah, well,
don't go there, girl.
I trust what you're going to put in front of me and ask me to be a part of. Secondary to that, the neo-masculinity to me is who my grandfather and my son represented in this world. And those are my grandfather was the kind of man that Ben wanted to grow up and be like. He wanted to emulate who he was as a person and what he represented as a man. And that is that you are the patriarch of your family, no matter what size it is. And my grandfather had a large family, six children, and then, grandchildren and, you know, in-laws and then great grandchildren. I had a vast circle of influence. And Ben saw that, from the time he was a baby. He grew up with that influence. And Ben, although Ben, obviously didn't live as many years as my grandfather, he did make good on his promise to grow up and be like him at the age of 21. He did. He influenced as many people, if not more, than my grandfather did in those 21 years because he had such conviction to become that man that would have a positive impact on the people that were in his circle and to serve his country for the greater good of all people. It wasn't about Ben. It wasn't about, I'm Ben Cop and I'm a badass MFer and I'm gonna go kick some butt. It was like, no, I'm Ben Cop. I learned to be a man from my great grandfather who I respect and admire deeply. And I want to go out and make the world a better place and teach people what it is to make the world a better place. And that's what he did. And that's what he did. And that was the man that I helped raise, that God allowed me to help raise. And I took my influence and injected it into my own son. And he made good on that promise. And he still is. And I can see, in the world we live in is changed significantly, significantly since 2009. We don't need to unpack what all those are, but masculinity is definitely an aspect that's been missing or that has diminished, in those years. Okay, so anyway, masculinity is something that has been looked upon in a different light over the last 16 years. And that's not something that I take lightly. I travel quite a bit, by car and by airplane. And I see young men walking through airports, John, wearing, Hello Kitty pajama pants and carrying a blanket or a stuffed animal with them. And I just want to go over and
I can't even imagine.
I'm not even
Yeah.
going to say that. I have thoughts and it provokes me like, what kind of a man are you? And who has raised you and allowed you to be this excuse of a young man? You know, this is not the person that I want representing my future. My future. Be a man and be proud of who you are. And and I just, as frustrating as it is to see that again and again and again and again, I it just it ups the ante on my gratitude that I wasn't raised like that. My son wasn't raised like that. My grandfather was not raised like that. My father was not raised like that. That Ben got to have the influences that he did, the influencers that he did. And so it's really important to me to continue to support that because I still have an influence on people. I still have an audience around me, whatever that may look like, my network on social media and, where I am in my community and in work and all different aspects of that. I'm still representing who Ben is. He just simply handed the baton off to me. So I'm still, we're still a team. He's just on that side of the veil and I'm here. And so I believe it's my duty to keep that message going. And it's not only my duty, it's my belief. And it's up to me to help spread that into the world to keep things going in the right direction and not let that masculinity just fade away. Not in my timeline, not in my life. That's not going to happen.
Well, we definitely appreciate it. And I can say this, we talk about toxic masculinity, right? Not we, but they do.
Yeah.
And what we're doing is we're reversing it. We're calling it toxic emasculinity. Because when a man is emasculated from his role and primary purpose in life, he can't exercise what he needs to exercise. And without purpose, men do become toxic.
Yeah.
They wear pajamas in airports.
Hmm.
They're frustrated, they're angry.
Yeah.
A man without purpose is a man without a rudder. And
Yeah.
I agree with you, Jill, and that's why we decided to embark on this mission of helping to empower men, which empowers women as well, but also to save our children and our families from the evil, destructive ways of those who spread vile propaganda,
Yeah. Yeah.
misinformation and disinformation and all these things. So thank you for being that mom that has that foundation that Ben benefited from, and so did our country and all the people around him. Just thank you for that. We mean that, and I look forward to the future of what we're going to be doing.
Yeah.
But on a personal note, I'm going to ask you a couple personal things. And what's your favorite movie?
Well, I think that would change depending on what I watched most recently or what's come in front of me. And but there is a movie that, well, I'm going to give you two of them because there are two movies that Ben watched that he absolutely loved. And I watched them both again recently, and I watched them both more than once in the last 16 years. But the one I watched the most recently is called An Unfinished Life, and it stars Robert Redford. That's why I was reminded to watch it because he recently passed away. It's Robert Redford, Morgan Freeman, and Jennifer Lopez. And the movie came out, I think, in 2005. So it goes back a long time. But it's about the effect of losing a loved one and how we keep them with us and what we do to honor their lives. And I didn't realize when I watched it again most recently that that was the foundation of the storyline. I just forgot that. And I was like, oh wow, okay.
Mhm.
This is a big part of why I watch that. But An Unfinished Life. And I feel like that could represent Ben, dying at 21, or, sacrificing his life at 21. Was his life unfinished? Some might say so. No, he could have influenced the world even more. But we live on God's timeline on our own, right?
It's true.
And the other one is Secondhand Lions. And that's a fantastic movie about it's Robert Duvall and James Caan, and they're two old guys that live together, and they're pretty tough. They're pretty tough old guys. They're battle worn and live a hard life and they have a teenage boy who kind of gets dumped on their porch, if you will, by a relative. And he comes from the city and they teach him their ways. And it's that influence, that old guy influence, like that my grandfather had on Ben. And it's just a great story. It's very funny, it's lighthearted, but it has a lot of really deep meaning. And so that's the other one.
Well,
An
two movies I
Unfinished
haven't
Life.
seen. Yeah, now they're on. Go
Oh,
ahead.
you've got to watch it. Secondhand Lions. Guarantee you will watch it more than once.
Well,
It's
thank
one of
you for
those
that.
movies that you can watch again and again and enjoy it each time.
How about your favorite book?
Gosh, there's a lot of books. Again, it depends on, what my mood is. There's one book that had a strong influence on me. I read it a long, long time ago. It's called Dirt Rich. There is another book out that if you plug this into Amazon, I think it'll come up first with the same title. But this one is about, it's a saga, a family saga of people and it's loosely based on a true story, true facts. People in the Oklahoma and northern Texas area who discover oil kind of accidentally. And it's the saga of how a poor family comes into great wealth and kind of lives in this peak for a long time of the wealth and the benefits of having found oil. And then it all falls apart. The bottom falls out, and all these things happen. And in the end, the same two people who started out together end up together after not being busted apart in the height of all that stuff. And it to me, it's kind of the story of our lives in general. Like we start out innocent and things happen that are out of our control, and then we roll with it. And if we're not careful, things can become out of our control. We lose sight of what really matters most. But
That's,
in the end,
yeah.
what comes full circle in the book is they regained the sight of what did matter most.
Favorite color. This is an easier one.
Green. Green's always been my favorite color. It's the color of the forest. I love
Okay.
trees. I love trees. I love being in the woods. I love being in nature, and it's different hues of green. I've always loved green.
How about your favorite vehicle? If you could have your primo ride, what would you drive?
It would be
Hmm.
it would be a Camaro, but it would be from either 1967, 68, or 69.
Like a restored one. That back when the Camaro was a Camaro.
Well,
Yeah.
yes, the muscle cars. I've always loved muscle cars. My dad loves muscle cars, and I just always have. And that, I mean, that's the era that I was raised into, in the early mid 70s when all those cars were
Oh
on
my
the
gosh.
road. But um, we go to car shows as often as we can, and those are the ones I seek out. I love the muscle cars, but that 3 year period, the 67, 8, 9, there wasn't a lot of difference in the way that they looked. They're all pretty similar, but that era of
Oh my
Camaro.
gosh. Mustangs, GTOs, Roadrunners,
GTOs, oh my God, yeah, the
uh,
Plymouth Furies, yeah, the Roadrunners, the
Barracuda.
Barracudas, oh my
Oh
gosh, the Plymouths, yeah, they're just so fun to see.
yeah. Gosh, it brings back the good old days. Those were
Yeah,
fun cars.
yeah, oh yeah,
I never had a muscle car. I drove around in a Honda Civic at a young
yeah,
age. All my friends had them, right? But
yeah, yeah.
how about a famous quote that sticks with you? And then after you give me the quote, then what I'd like for you to do is think about three tips that you would give to a single mom about raising a child, a boy, or to a father who's raising a boy who may have forgotten some of those values. But so, favorite quote, and then the Jill Stephenson words of wisdom.
Mm, Favorite quote comes from Albert Pike. And Albert Pike he was an attorney. He he was a writer, and he was also brigadier general during the Civil War. And he has a quote that I've used a lot in my speeches and my writings that says, "What we do for ourselves dies with us. What we do for others in the world remains and is immortal." That's huge. What we do for ourselves dies with us, but what we give to the world remains immortal. And my son's story is a perfect example of that.
It's a
You know,
testimony and a legacy,
it is.
to hard work
Yeah.
and the sacrifice and all of those things that people sometimes just talk about and offer lip
Hmm.
service, but true love of country,
Yeah.
love outside of themselves,
Hmm.
self-sacrifice,
Sacrifice.
self-agency,
Yeah.
self-responsibility, teamwork, and family,
Yeah.
and mission-oriented persistence, perseverance,
Yeah.
the things that make some people rise above the rest. And
Hmm.
then they do become, and it's not trite, it's that beacon of light.
Yeah.
Ben's a beacon of light. And I remember you talking to me. We were somewhere. Now I'm going back, Jill. We were at a party. It was a party or get together or something, and the lighting was just right, and you had the hashtag Benergy. And you
Yeah.
came up to me and you said something like, John, I feel Benergy here. And I'm looking at you, and you said Ben's here with us today. And I think it was a
Yeah.
bunch of veterans and a few
Yeah.
gold stars and family members. But I remember that moment and it stuck with me. And
Hmm.
I totally believe that Ben has always been around us.
Yeah.
And sometimes we might forget that you probably don't as his mother. But I
Hmm.
think of all the Benergies out there and all of the people that have sacrificed so much, but have had mothers like you and parents like you that gave so much and it brushed off on their kids.
Yeah. Yeah.
So three words of advice to that single mom out there who might be raising another ranger, or who is, or a man who's raising a kid.
Don't be a helicopter parent. Let your child, let your little boy be a boy. Let him experience, skinning his knee. Let him get dirty. Let him get dirty. Don't be a helicopter parent. That prevents them from having experiences that will build their character. They need to build their character. Yeah. So hold fast to boundaries because without boundaries, there's no trust. If you don't give boundaries to your children, then they're not going to trust you or respect you in a time of chaos because what they're going to see is that you're not able to create boundaries that keep them safe. Boundaries create safety, and that's what our children need from us as parents is to feel safe. Create those boundaries. You can still create boundaries without being a helicopter parent. That means you mean what you say and you say what you mean.
Yeah, very, very intense and very valuable words of wisdom.
And John, most importantly though, is to love them. To love them and to let them know that you love them. Don't be angry with them. Remember that your child is a child. Even though that 15-year-old, 16-year-old mouthy teenager is, behaving like they know everything, remember that they're still a child and their wisdom is not going to equal yours until they have equal experience that you do. Keep in mind that you are their role model and you have that opportunity to help mold them into the kind of person that you want them to become and that the world needs.
You know,
But
I
do it all from a basis of love.
when you say that, I know now that I put my mother through hell
Yeah.
um, on so many different levels, and she just recently passed a year ago, actually November 11th. But and like you missed Ben, I miss my mom.
Yeah.
Um, and I think there's always some kind of a special bond between a mother and a son that's
Hmm.
hard to identify. But I
Hmm.
can tell you this, and I know you were like this, just like my mom, she was always there for me.
Hmm.
And even when I did something stupid or ridiculous or out of character,
Hmm.
I know she was upset, but she always showed that unconditional love that mothers show their kids. And I
Hmm.
even at 66, I miss my mom.
Yeah.
And I wasn't a mama's boy, believe me.
Yeah.
I wasn't. I did skin my knees, but I want to say, thank you, Jill, for your time, and thank you for being you, Jill Stephenson, and thank you for Ben and what he meant to so many people and to you and to me as well. And thank you to the listeners and the viewers of today's show. Um, it's not about me, it's not about Jill, it's not about Ben, it's about all of us and how we can make people's lives better. And then again, it is about us. We have to be on the tip of the spear. We have to be the point people, men and
Yeah.
women, to make sure that our children and families are protected from threats. So thank you very much, Joe. I appreciate you. And I know I'll be seeing you soon and drive
Yeah.
on.
Yeah. Thanks for having me, John. I appreciate it.
You're welcome. Talk to you soon, Joe.
Okay.